I'm live. I've got a virtual background behind me, ready to talk about holy ground, holy sites. Steve, your background is not virtual, is it? Where are you?
I'm in Jerusalem. Welcome. I'm glad to be with you. Sorry about my face half shaded, but the sun is right in my eyes. I had a difficult time finding a place to get a nice background here in Jerusalem because it's very windy and very noisy here. But I found this courtyard. This is about the only place I could do this with sanity.
Yep.
And sorry about the shade in my eyes, but it was a matter of function here.
Yeah, no, you look, it does look fantastic. The background is incredible. The photos that I have as our backdrop here are photos that I have not gotten off the internet. Those are photos that you have sent me. Are these the incredible sights you have seen that you're looking at every day?
We're staying at the Notre Dame Center, a hotel here right outside the old city walls. And it's right in the heart of old Jerusalem. And the pictures in the video we're going to show are pictures I just took 10 minutes ago from the patio.
Wow.
So this is something that we see all the time while we're here. Is that picture up right now for people to see?
It sure is. So it is serving as our background right now.
Okay, I'll explain what that is. The big steeple on the right-hand side is the Franciscan Protectorate of the Holy Land. It's called St. Xavier Church. That's where the local Christians from Jerusalem meet for Mass, and that is the Franciscan Church. In the center, you see two gray domes. Those gray domes are over the top of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus was crucified, buried, died, and rose again. So when you go inside the church under those domes, that's where Calvary is. We'll be taking our group there in a couple of days, and that's where the tomb is. So that is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That is the center of the world, as far as I'm concerned. To the left, you're beginning to see the Mount of Olives, and in the distance, there's the first row of mountains is a Judean wilderness. So you're heading east, you'd go down 4,150 feet down in elevation to the lowest place on the face of the earth. And those are the mountains of the Judean wilderness. And in the distance, on the far side, there are the mountains of Moab. That is where Ruth came from, and it's the country of Moab. So that's looking from the top of the Notre Dame Center, looking east over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Mount of Olives on the left, and the hills of Judea and the mountains of Jordan in the far distance.
Now let me, in a moment, whenever you tell me, I will play that video, but let me ask you, when we talk about holy ground, holy sites, what do we mean by that, Steve? What exactly, what do we mean by holy? Is it literally holy? And can we call the location that you're at holy ground in a special way?
Yes, we can. And I tell our people that only in this area would I be willing to call it holy ground.
Yeah.
When I take our groups to Rome or Guadalupe or Lourdes and Fatima, that's sacred sites, sacred ground because of what's happened there. But I call this land holy ground because God sanctified it with his own feet. He came down with his own feet, got them muddy and had flies buzzing around his head, had camel dung between his toes, and he walked the paths. Right, if we would just, in another picture that you put up in a minute, I will show you right where the temple was. Yeah, there we go. You can see there, you're looking, this is a more wide angle. You could still see the domes of the Holy Sepulchre next to the tall steeple on the right. But if you move from there, you see the gold dome of the Rock, which is set on top of Temple Mount. And if you'd have looked there 2,000 years ago, you would have seen the temple, the second temple. Herod rebuilt Solomon's temple that was destroyed. And when they came back from Babylon, they built the temple, but it was not very glorious. Herod made it magnificent. Jesus said, "This is my Father's house."
Yeah.
And so where that gold dome is, that is where the temple would have stood. And then you see off in the distance the Mount of Olives, and right at the base of that Mount of Olives in the distance is Gethsemane, where Jesus sweat drops of blood. And you can see that I can stand up on top of this roof and tell the whole story of salvation history right from the top of this roof, because it's all in front of your eyes. God walked here. God didn't walk in Rome. God didn't walk in Lourdes and Fatima. God walked on this land. And that's why we call it holy ground, because he sanctified it with his own feet and his own presence. For example, when we take our group to the Jordan River, we tell everybody to take an empty water bottle, fill it up with water, and take it home and put a little bit in the holy water font when your grandkids are getting baptized. And they've been baptized with water from the River Jordan. But people always fill their bottles and they want to get the water blessed. I said, you don't need to have the priest bless that, because Jesus already blessed it when he entered the River Jordan. He sanctified the water of this river for our salvation. So it's already holy water, just like this is holy ground.
I didn't know that. That's incredible. That truly is incredible. Now, you bring up a number of really good points there when you call it holy, sacred ground. And we get this directly from the Bible. You know, you can find it directly in the Bible. Isn't that correct?
Yes. And holy ground, when you want to think of it in terms of that, is bigger than just the 8,000 square miles of Israel. Israel is no bigger than the state of New Jersey. It would fit inside Texas 44 times. That's how small Israel is. It would fit in Lake Michigan 2.5 times.
Wow.
But the holy ground is actually bigger than that, because it would include the Sinai, because that's where God revealed himself, came down in fire in the bush. And it would include parts of Jordan as well, because Jesus was actually baptized on the other side of the Jordan River in the country of Jordan, which is where Elijah's from. That's where John the Baptist was beheaded. There's a lot. We're going to, in November, we're taking a group to Jordan first and then coming over here. It's going to be a long trip, but it's very cool. So in the book of Exodus, it says, then God said to Moses, and Moses is now in the wilderness of Sinai, which I've been to many times and gone up Mount Sinai. I don't know how many times I've been up Mount Sinai to the top and watched the sunrise over the wilderness there. But when Moses was out there shepherding the sheep for 40 years, towards the end of that, God said, do not come near, but put off your shoes from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. This ground, Moses could have said, wait a minute, God. He says, I walked the same path yesterday. It was the same dirt, the same rocks yesterday as it is today. Why is it holy now and it wasn't yesterday? Because I touched it, God would say. I have touched down, therefore I have sanctified it. Whatever God touches, he sanctifies. Just think of this, William. You weren't allowed to touch lepers. Lepers used to go through the streets crying out, unclean, unclean, and everybody would run from their distance to get away from them. Jesus walked up and he touched the lepers. He didn't become a leper and contaminated when he touched the lepers. Rather, he sanctified and healed the lepers. When God comes down on this earth, wherever he touches is holy ground. Another one I really like is in 1 Kings chapter 5. Naaman, who is the general of the Syrian army, has leprosy. He comes down to Israel and he sees the little girl of he talks to a girl in Syria who was a slave, and she said, there's a prophet in Israel, in my country, he can heal you. So Naaman comes down from Syria and he talks to Elisha the prophet, and he says, go into the water of the River Jordan, you'll be healed. And when he was healed and he had to go back home, he said, if not, I pray you, let there be given to your servant 2 mules and burdens from the earth. For henceforth, your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any other God but the Lord. What that means is that I know that this is holy ground because your God is here. When I go back to Syria, it will not be the God of Israel. It will be the God that we serve. Usually it was Baal or one of the others. Yeah. So what he said is, I'm going to take 2 mules and I'm going to load them up with dirt from this land, and I'm going to take it up to Syria. And whenever I worship, I'm going to stand on that dirt. So I'm standing on the holy ground from Israel so that I can worship the God of Israel on his own dirt. In my movie on Elijah and Elisha, you can see me with a donkey filling up bags of dirt and putting them on the donkey and carrying them away to Syria.
Yeah.
But that's holy ground.
That really is an incredible explanation there, Steve, because I think a lot of people don't quite realize the difference between sacred, between holy. Now, let me ask you this particular question. When it comes to these sacred sites, this holy land, this holy ground, is there a kind of commonality between Catholics and Orthodox? And then how do Protestants as well factor into how do they react to this certain area? And then let me ask you this, are there Protestant churches over there?
I'll expand it a little more to include the Jews.
Yeah, yes.
Because the Jews also view this as Holy Land.
Wow.
And they were separated from it for almost 2,000 years, although there were always some Jews living here. But in 1948, they got the land back, and they wept when they got the land. And then in 1973, when the Six-Day War, they were able to go back to the Western Wall for the first time because they conquered Jerusalem. I think I got that date right. There's so many dates I got to remember all the time. But it was the Six-Day War. I think it was 1970s. Yes. And they took over the area of Jerusalem, and you can see pictures. They call it the Wailing Wall because they arrived at the wall and they wailed for joy that after 2,000 years that wall was theirs. That is the most sacred place in all of the world for Jews because that's where the temple stood. And what was in the temple? God dwelled in the temple.
Yeah.
That's why you always go up to Jerusalem. You never in the Bible does it say go down to Jerusalem. Even if you're leaving Galilee and coming south, you're never going down. You're always going up to Jerusalem because that's where God lives. It's the highest place on the face of the earth. Even if you come here by helicopter, you're still going up to Jerusalem. So the Jews consider this holy ground. And also Machpelah, which is just 15 miles to the south of here. That's where Abraham and Sarah, Jacob and Rachel, Jacob and Leah and Jacob and Isaac and Rebecca are buried in Hebron. And that is the second most holy place for Jews. So they consider this Holy Land too. And there's a lot of the radical Jews, of course, they're called the settlers. They're trying to take over everything. They want to get all the Palestinians out. So they once again own this land every bit like it was back in Joshua's day when they conquered the land. But anyway, so the Jews considered holy ground. Now, among the Christians, you can put it in three different categories. You already named them. The Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, which would include pretty much here the Greek Orthodox. They are the predominant one. In fact, the most Christians here really are not the Jews. There's only about 400 acknowledged Catholics who are Christian. The Christians here are the Palestinians, and they make up less than 1.5% of the population. And the Palestinian Christians are mainly Greek Orthodox. In all of, I know I'm giving a long answer, but I think it's helpful.
Great
in all of the area of Israel, the Palestinian areas, the island of Cyprus, and the country of Jordan. That is the diocese of Jerusalem, those four areas. It's called the Patriarchate or the Archdiocese. And the Patriarch is like the Archbishop of those four areas. And in those four areas, even including all of Jordan, Cyprus, Palestinian areas, and Israel, only 54,000 Catholics. That's not many, 54,000. There's some parishes in the United States probably that have almost that.
Wow.
But the majority of them are Greek Orthodox. And then they all, the same thing, they all consider this holy ground. And there's a lot of competition for real estate, especially in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is divided up among 6 different traditions: the Orthodox, the Armenian, the Catholics, the Coptics, the Ethiopians, and the Assyrians. And that it gets pretty contentious at times because it's some pretty contested real estate. But they all consider this holy ground like we as Catholics do. Then you've got the Protestants. They're another whole animal, so to speak. And they also would hold to this being holy ground, but not in the same sense. They don't have a sacramental mentality of life. And whereas we come here ready to practice the sacraments and to celebrate the Mass here and all of the beauty of the Catholic faith and the Rosary and all the sacramentals we have, the Protestants generally come with a Bible and a notebook. They consider themselves tourists. They're not pilgrims. Catholics come as pilgrims. Protestants come as tourists. And they come here to see the sights. We come to experience and to feel. I think back when I was a Protestant. I had never come to Israel as a Protestant. Only first time, 1995. I came as a Catholic with my family. And I try to put myself in the shoes of what would I have done if I was a Protestant? It would have been a very, very different trip. It would have been more of a tour Whereas as a Catholic, yes, it's a tour, but it's far deeper than that. It's sacramental, incarnational. It's a pilgrimage.
That really is a good point that you bring up there, Steve, because I was talking with a fellow priest friend of mine who he got quite offended when I said, "So, Father, you're going to the Holy Land. You're going on a vacation," and he right away said, "No, no, 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 no. I am going on a pilgrimage." And there's a very big difference, Steve. I had not heard of that distinction being drawn, but indeed, as Catholics, we are able to make that distinction. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, we just had dinner with Father Dwight Longenecker. You probably know of him.
I do. Yes, I do.
And he's here for a 2-month sabbatical. And he would be aghast if you said, "How's your vacation going?"
Yeah.
He's here on a sabbatical or a pilgrimage, and he's seeing the land. So yeah, it is a quite different perspective between Catholics and Protestants here. And I can spot a Protestant group a mile away because I used to be one, but they conduct themselves differently. I'll tell you one of the sad things. We were at the Church of Gethsemane, and we were having mass there at the rock where Jesus sweat drops of blood and asked to take this cup from me. That's where all of the sins of the world fell upon him before he went to the cross. And we just celebrated a mass with tears and with reading the readings of the agony in the garden and having the real blood and the real body of Christ, and that wonderful hour of great emotion. And then we walked outside, and I saw 4 Protestants sitting on a step outside with their little plastic containers where they open it up and they take a piece of cracker out and they eat it. And then they have another little container with aluminum foil. They peel that off, and it's Welch's grape juice, and they drank that. And that was for them communion. And I think of the Protestants, how they stripped Christianity down to nothing, down to the bare bones. And that just gives you one indication of the difference between coming here as a Catholic and a Protestant.
Very different, nothing compared to the biblical example as well of the Lord's Supper. And then if you look at the unanimous testimony of the early churches, you know very well, Steve, they nothing of the sort would have ever occurred in the early church. It really does go to show you, Steve, how disconnected Protestantism is from ancient Christianity. And that really is a sad thing.
I'll give you an example of this sacramental, incarnational aspect of it. If I came as a Protestant, I could come and look at the site, and I may be emotional at the tomb of Christ. I'm sure many are. But the funny thing is, or sad thing is that most Protestants, a good number of them anyway, don't go to the Holy Sepulchre. They instead go to another place called the Garden Tomb, which is the Protestant Calvary and tomb, which is known by everybody to not be true.
Right.
We can talk more about that. Well, I'll just say this about it, that it was only just made to be, it's called the Garden Tomb outside of the Damascus Gate up the Nablus Road a little way. And General Gordon in the 1800s from England found a tomb. He didn't like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because he said, "Oh, that's inside the city walls. Jesus was crucified outside the city walls." So he went to look for another place. He found a tomb, and there's a quarry in it. He kind of made an image of a skull there because it had 2 holes, and if you look at it kind of cross-eyed, you can see a skull there. So he said, "This is it," and they turned it into the Garden Tomb. And they claim that is the real tomb of Christ because they don't like the really Catholic, Orthodox, ancient Holy Sepulchre. But all archaeologists, and in my book on St. John's Gospel, I go into this about 3 pages, that all archaeologists and historians know for a fact that the tomb that he's pointing out was an 800 BC tomb. Archaeologists and scientists know 800 BC. Jesus was placed in a newly hewn tomb. And under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there are tombs from 2,000 years ago. That is the real place. But now my daughter, to show you the sacramentality of it, my daughter, when she was about 12 or 15, we bring our kids here because there's nothing better to do to make your kids stay Catholic than to bring them here. And my daughter went over by herself to pray at the tomb. She went in, and she came back a little bit later just weeping and in tears and sobbing, and threw herself on the bed. And I said to Emily, "What is wrong? What happened to you over there?" And she just kept crying. In 10 minutes, I said, "Emily, you have to tell me what happened." And she said, "Dad, I've been over there at the tomb with you so many times, but this time I realized he was really there."
Yeah, wow.
And she had a mystical experience with the Lord in that tomb. And she'll tell you to this day, now that she's older and with 3 kids, she'll tell you that that moment in the tomb was formational for her, foundational for her. So there's a big difference, I think, between the way how you come to the land and how you envision Christianity and the church. It has a big impact on how you walk in the footprints of Jesus. And nobody pays attention to Mary here either. If you're a Protestant, that's irrelevant. It's all about Jesus. But our group, we use the Rosary as our itinerary, and we give Our Lady great honor while we're here. In fact, the hotel we're staying at is Notre Dame, Our Lady.
Wow. Now, let me ask you this. Are there any particular areas in the location where you're at or in the surrounding region that would be known for places that that Holy Mary would have traversed, that Holy Mary would have walked and visited?
Oh, yes. A couple of them are, and they're quite emotional for people. Our group is arriving on Monday. I get here ahead of time to get over jet lag and make everything sure. We've never had a complaint in 5 years, only compliments, because we make this very professional, and I come here early to make sure everything's in place ahead of time. I don't leave anything to chance. And so on Tuesday, our first full day, we're going to end that day in Nazareth, and we're going to also visit Cana. So in Cana,
wow,
that's where Jesus said to the Lord, they have no wine. And he knew she was asking for a miracle. And he said, my hour hasn't come yet, Mom. Because he knew that as soon as he did his first miracle, or as John calls it, a sign. John never uses the word miracle in his gospel, only the word sign. And there's 7 of them because that's the perfect number of God. But the first sign was in Cana. And when Mary said, do whatever he tells you, Jesus knew he had to obey his mother. And even though he said it's not his time, Mother Mary said, Jesus, it is time to start your ministry. Start it now at my command. And she turned around and walked away, and he did what she said, and his ministry began. That's on Tuesday. We'll be there. We'll end the day in Nazareth at the cave under the Church of Annunciation, where the angel met Mary and said, Hail, Kahare Tomene. Hail, you who are full of grace, who are made full of grace and remain in that state to the end of this time. Hail Mary, you who are full of grace and remain that way. We will pray the first mystery of the Rosary right there where the angel said that.
Steve,
and I say to people,
let me add one thing, because it's a great point you made there, and I want to emphasize for the crowd that when I wrote my book on Holy Mary, indeed, Steve was the very first person I reached out to look at the book and to give his stamp of approval on it, because you've done incredible work on Mary. And I want to touch upon that exact word that you pointed out there, Steve. Is it not true that when the angel greets Mary with that particular Greek word, it's indicative of grace that she's in full possession of even before Jesus is in her womb? That wouldn't that indicate that she was holy from a very special time, that being when she was created?
Yes, even more than that, it's the word kahare tomene is a past perfect, if I remember right.
Yeah.
I'm not a grammarian, but I do know that word has 2 components to it, past and present. It's also passive tense, meaning it was done to you. You didn't do it. It was done to you. And it means the past component is you who were made full of grace, and the present, and who still remain in that state at this moment. So you have Jesus, Mary being notified by the angel that she was made full of grace before. At her conception is the way we understand it, and that she remains in that state today. And what is the grace of God? It's his very life. It's a something that he puts in her. The very grace of God that Eve lost in the Garden of Eden when sanctifying grace died in her. And the new Eve now has that grace put back in her. And Mary now has that sanctifying grace. And if I had a glass of pure water here, saying full of pure water, there's nothing else in there like dirt, mud, or chemicals to contaminate it. If Mary is full to the top of grace of God, the life of God, then there's no sin or anything else in there that can contaminate that. But we're going to say the mystery of the Rosary there, the first joyful mystery, at that cave where 2,000 years ago, the angel stood right there in that space and time and did that. And this is what I love. When I tell people this, they get goosebumps, because on the altar where we're standing, where Mary was standing, there's an altar there, and it says, the Word became flesh here. The Word became flesh here. Without Nazareth, there would be no Jerusalem, there'd be no Bethlehem. It all started in Nazareth. So we're going to be there. Then there's other places that we're going to be. We're going to be on the upper room, and it said Mary was there. We're going to be at the cross. It says Mary was there at the foot of the cross. And there's this beautiful statue of Mary with a sword piercing into her chest.
Yes.
And that's right next to where Calvary stood. So we're gonna be at the visitation where Mary made haste to visit her relative Elizabeth. And there you see the Ark of the New Covenant. So we make an emphasis of the Marian sites, and we honor her there, and we pray every mystery of the Rosary where it happened along the way.
Well, you honor her as best as you can, as our incarnate God honored her. I mean, as you point out, what a great point that you make. Because with the visitation of Elizabeth, indeed, all the imagery and the textual evidence shows us that she's being presented as the new Ark of the New Covenant. Yep. And I want to recommend people, briefly off topic, people go to Steve's website. He has an incredible list of early church fathers he's compiled that talk about Mary as being the new Ark of the New Covenant. But Steve, here's one thing that I hear sometimes brought up, and I know if anybody can answer it would be you. Well, here people say, well, okay, look, this is all fine and dandy, great, great pious beliefs. But Steve, how do you know these holy sites in the Holy Land are authentic? How do you know it's just not merely pious legend?
Well, that's a good question, and it's one we get asked all the time. And it's a fair question, because if I'm bringing people over here and they're spending all this money, and I say, I'm going to show you the places of Jesus. Oh, yeah, well, how do you know they're the places of Jesus? Yeah. Very fair question. Mm-hmm. And then the answer is, there are sites we don't know. For example, Emmaus, the road to Emmaus. There's about 5 places that vie for that site. And the Franciscan have chosen a place called Kabibi, which I think is probably the right one. But Lutrun and other places also have claims one way or another they want to be the road to Emmaus, the city of Emmaus. But while some sites are not known, like it's that square inch right there, you know that it's within this area. But there are places that we know without question. For example, the Holy Sepulchre. Nobody doubts that is the place, except for the Protestants who don't like that place and don't want to follow the science. The true science. So because what happened there is that Jesus died and rose again, and Christians came and they remembered that site. The early Christians aren't going to forget that site. And then Emperor Hadrian built a big pagan temple over it to obliterate it. Oh. Then 313, when Queen Helen comes, or 320 or so, when she came, she asked the local Christians, where was the place where Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again? And all that, you just go ask a little kid, he would know. It's a little 6-year-old take you by the hand, took the queen right there under that big temple there. So she knocks the temple down, and what does she find under there? She finds still intact the grotto, the cave of Jesus's crucifixion. She finds the wood crosses that had been left there. And they build now a church, and nobody ever forgot that, because then since 325 or 324, there's been a huge basilica there. Now, I'm going to give you one that's even more interesting that I really like. I tell this one on the bus. How do we know the authentic sites? I tell this one on the bus when we go from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, because there is a site along the way, which is very significant. So let's go back 4,000 years. Jacob is traveling through Jerusalem, going through Bethlehem, down to Hebron and to Beersheba. He's on the Hebron Road, it's called, and that's the road we drive on when we go to Bethlehem. And as he's riding along, his wife Rachel is 9 months pregnant. When they get to the entrance of Bethlehem, it's called Bethlehem Ephrathah, 2 names for Bethlehem. It says that she got off her camel. These were tough ladies back then, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
She got off her camel, gave birth to Benjamin, and she died in childbirth.
Wow.
Jacob buries her on the side of the road. Then he carries on to Beersheba. From there, he goes with his family to Egypt for 400 years. Then they travel in the wilderness for 40 years. They cross over with Joshua. They take over the land. And for 365 years, they're there until King Saul becomes the king. That's 800 years since Rachel was buried. Now, I would ask Americans, how many of you know where your great-great-grandparents are buried? 1 out of 100 will raise their hand and know where their great-great-grandparents are buried. But now we're 800 years since she was buried. King Saul loses his donkeys. He goes to the prophet Samuel and says, can you help me find my donkeys? The prophet Samuel says to King Saul, go to the tomb of Rachel. and you will find your donkeys. See, the Eastern mind is much different than us in the West.
Oh, yeah.
They remember these things. Some of the Bedouins out in the wilderness can recite by memory 40 generations back, the names of their relatives going back 400 years, I should say, not 4 generations, 400 years, and tell you the exploits of each one of them, because then they will give that to their son who will memorize it. And they can, the Eastern mentality, and for the Jews especially, keeping track of these things was very important. They are the people of the book. They're also the people of their memory, their sacred, holy memory. And if they can remember, even to this day, when I drive into Bethlehem, I say, that's the tomb of Rachel there. And if you want to see it, watch my movie on David, because we go into the tomb of Rachel in that synagogue and show you inside. So that gives you an idea. Now, with Bethlehem, for example, Bethlehem is mentioned first there with Jacob, but then the next time it's mentioned, there's other times, but it's mainly mentioned in the book of Ruth. Because Ruth is a Moabitess. She moves there with Naomi. She marries Boaz in Bethlehem. Boaz has a son named Obed. Obed has a son named Jesse. Jesse has a son in Bethlehem named David. We know where that city is. Micah then writes in chapter 5, verse 2, and I'll sing this one for you. Oh, little town of Bethlehem. Those words come right out of Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And then he said, for about 500 years before Christ, there's going to be coming the great king from this little city. And sure enough, Jesus is born. Then the people start coming there. They remember where that cave is. Mary remembered where that cave is. Little babies were killed because of a baby born in that cave.
Yeah.
Wise men came from the east because of the baby born in that cave. Nobody's going to forget where that cave is. And then the church fathers, all the way from Justin Martyr and John Chrysostom, would say, even at this late date, 385, even at this late date, pilgrims come to see the cave where the baby was born. Then Queen Helen builds the big church over that. Nobody forgets where that is. There's no question of the authenticity of these sites. Now, I agree there's a few that we aren't certain completely, but Capernaum, we certainly are. Cana, the Mount of Transfiguration, although the Protestants have their own mountain. But we know where these places are, and they've been known for 2,000 years.
Now, Steve, you bring up very good points there, because even if we look at in the Bible, when when we hear the incredible words of St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Corinthians 15, 2 Thessalonians, where he indicates that he's very well aware of sacred tradition, whether written or orally passed down.
Right.
This really does seem to be something quite common. Isn't that correct?
Right. On Tuesday, while we're driving up to Mount Tabor, which is the mountain of Transfiguration, we get there early so we don't have any lines. We beat all the other groups there by 45 minutes. So we're the first ones up the mountain. We have mass there at the top of the mountain at 8 o'clock in the morning. By the way, people always ask me, how long did it take Jesus to walk up that mountain? And I always said, I don't know. But then about 10 years ago, I had a car here, and I drove over there in the morning, and I crawled up that mountain. It's 1,900 feet above the plain below, and I crawled up. It took me 55 minutes. So now I know how long it took Jesus to get up there. I was hurrying. He wasn't. So it probably took them an hour and 15 minutes. But that was right from the base all the way to the top. So when we're driving there, my guide, Amir, who I've used on 80 trips, 80.
Wow.
We've worked together on 80 pilgrimages, my wife and him and I, and our driver. And he will tell the people, how do we know that Mount Tabor is the place of the Transfiguration, even though some Protestants came over here 50 years ago or so, and they claimed that Mount Hermon is the place where Jesus was transfigured. Mount Hermon is almost 9,000 feet high, covered with snow, good part of the year. And just unbelievable. He says, so my family's lived in this land from the beginning. He said, I'm a Palestinian Christian. Our origins are here. We can trace our history back 1,000 years or more, and we know where these things happen. And our ancestors built churches there where those things happen. And the Protestant comes over here 100 years ago and says, I'm sorry, you're all wrong, that Jesus was really transfigured over on that other mountain. He says, really? How do you know that? Were you here? We were here. Now, he tells it this way. How do I know? Because my father told me so. And his father told him, and his father told him. And since the beginning, every father here, every Christian father has told his son where the Mount of Transfiguration was. They know where that is. He said one time he was driving, when he first got his driver's license, his grandpa said to him, come on, we're going to go for a ride. I'll let you drive the car. They went a long way out into a field, and they got out of the car and they walked across the field to a carob tree. And my guide, his name's Amr, he's thinking, why did you bring me out here to this carob tree? And the grandfather said, I want you to know, this is where I asked your grandmother to marry me. This is where your story starts, young man. Your story starts here. Because if I had not asked your grandmother to marry me here under this carob tree, you wouldn't be here today. Yeah. And it's not a bad idea if you bring your sons here someday and show them this carob tree and tell them to show it to their grandsons. This is the way the Eastern mind thinks. And when the Mount of Transfiguration, Mount Tabor, it's right in the middle of the Jezreel Valley. It's the mountain. And in Matthew chapter 28, that's where the Great Commission was given. Go out into all the world. He did that he said, meet me at the mountain. Well, what mountain is it? It's the Mount of Transfiguration, of course. They'd already been there. Now he's telling them from there, go out into, you can see the whole Israel, go out into all the world, he tells them from up top there. This is what's fun about coming here and bringing people, you connect all the dots in the Bible. But he says that in the 300s, the Christians always came up that mountain to celebrate it. People from Nazareth still on the feast day of the Transfiguration, they walk all the way from Nazareth and they go up to the top of Mount of Transfiguration walking, and they have mass and they have a big picnic, and then they go home every April 15th. They do that. Wow. They've been doing that for 2,000 years. And then very early in the 300s, there was about 5 churches built up there. There's no churches built on Mount Hermon, where the Protestants stayed. But the early Christians knew, and they built churches there to commemorate it. And they still go there, will be there on Tuesday, following 2,000 years of pilgrims up that mountain to celebrate Mass at the top.
Now, Steve, I'm reminded of the letters of the early fathers, of course, having been taught and trained by the apostles. And if anyone would know the details of holy lands, of holy sites, it would be people whose past patriarchal figures, past family members, past loved ones that have passed on this testimony. These people would be incredible witnesses, much better than a kind of modern day attempt to retell the traditional ancient story. And I think you bring up a really good point there. The people that are native to the land, they're going to know pretty well, aren't they? I mean, I think I would trust them. And
I would think so.
Yeah, no.
Especially because we have pilgrims like Egeria, who came through here in 382 and 383. She came through here for a year. She traveled through the Holy Land, and she kept a diary. You can go on Google and read her diary. It's called the Diary of Egeria. And for example, when she went past the Sea of Galilee, she said, we came to the place where Jesus gave breakfast to the disciples. And she said, there are still the steps carved into the rock where they went up to the top where Jesus gave them breakfast, and 3 hearts are still on the shore. What is she talking about? If you go there today, which we did just 2 weeks ago, we were there with a group. We're going back in a week with a new group. There, as you come to that place, that's in John chapter 21, where Jesus said, feed my sheep and tend my lambs, and where he fed them breakfast. And the rock at the time of Jesus was obviously the rock. It's called the Mensa Christi, the table of the Lord. He fed them on that rock. As the water level went down, they had to carve steps to get up to the top of the rock. Right now, the water level is so high, you can't see those steps. But when we were here 2 years ago, the water was down 20 feet. It goes up and down. Wow. So, and then on the shore, guess what? There's 3 white stones, big ones. They're shaped like a heart because, Jesus, I love you, I love you, I love you. So these 3 big hearts, those were there in 385 when the Egeria the nun came. These places are known, and they've been known by Christians from the beginning.
That really truly is incredible. They have been known from the beginning, and we know very well. We hear about it. We hear that the early Christians have an intimate knowledge of these particular places. Now, let me ask you this: the places. So, are there any other places where Protestants would perhaps claim? Well, we know they visit a lot of the same sites. Are there any other areas where they perhaps contest, or is pretty much everything else, an area where they would have no issue agreeing upon?
You don't see Protestants going to the Church of Annunciation. That's tied to the Rosary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, and so on. Even though they know that verse is in the Bible, I don't see Protestants going there. Maybe some do, but my guide who lives in Nazareth told me that Protestants avoid that place because it's too Catholic, probably.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Calvary and the tomb. I remember when my parents came, I brought my parents. I had to take them over there because their Baptist pastor told them the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was not the place. Make sure your son takes you to the real place at the Garden Tomb. So out of honor to my mother and father, I took them there, but I told them the truth about the site. So it was an educational moment. There's another place on the Mount of Olives where most Protestants will go, and even some Catholics, but it's a mosque, and it's they claim that's the place where Jesus ascended into heaven. We do it at the Church of Pater Noster, where Jesus taught his disciples to pray. That's where we pray the mystery of the Ascension. I think that's much more of an accurate place, but most Protestants would go to the mosque. The mosque and it's kind of clever because it's a mosque with no roof on it, because they said Jesus couldn't have a roof because he had to go up. So as if a roof is going to stop him. So let me think. There might be. I don't see Protestants. Well, I do see Protestants in the upper room. I do see a lot of the Pentecostals will be up there. But I'm just trying to think of there are other sites that they tend to go to more than, especially sites that are really tied to Mary, they tend to avoid too.
Well, which truly is unfortunate because Mary played such an important role in salvation history.
Yep.
She's such an important figure. It really is, in my opinion, Steve, it is unfortunate. And I think that it does highlight the importance of these incredible trips that you give, because you don't only focus upon one particular area, you really do give the full picture, the full picture of salvation history. And the name of the series of your videos, indeed, The Footprints of God. You go through these incredible sites. Let me, you know what? Before I ask you that next question, I don't want to forget about this. Let me play that video. Give me 1 second.
Okay, I just took this video about 45 minutes ago from the balcony here.
Here we go. This is an incredible.
And I explain a little bit what you're seeing.
Yeah, the sound should be audible. Let me play this.
From the top balcony of our hotel, looking out over the Jerusalem to the north, that's the church that marks the place where St. Stephen was martyred. That's Mount Scopus. That's the Mount of Olives. Right up there top is the church of the Pater Noster, where he taught him to pray and where he ascended into heaven. Right over there is also part of the Mount of Olives, the Dome of the Rock. Right there is the most special, though. Those two domes are the top of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose again. We look across all the way there over to Jordan. You can see the Jordan Valley into the mountains of Moab across there. And then that's the top of Mount Zion. That's where Mary fell asleep, the Dormition. Right next to that is the upper room and the Church of Peter in Gallicantu, where Peter denied Jesus. And this is our hotel, the Notre Dame Center here in Jerusalem.
Now that truly is incredible, Steve. You also visit, and I know this because we've talked about it, the location of the Dormition of Holy Mary, would that also be the location where she was bodily assumed into heaven as well?
Well, no, the basic story is that Mary, I'll give you the end of her life real quick, is that, and this is the way I explain it in my movie, Mary, Mother of God, in the Footprints of God series. And it's also in a very good book called Mary of Nazareth by Hesseman. He's a German journalist by Ignatius Press. But that Mary would have gone to Ephesus with John because he was the bishop there, and returned around 49 AD for the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15, which we read about in Mass this morning. And that was the Council of Jerusalem in 49 AD, Acts chapter 15. Mary would have been about 70 years old at the time, I believe. And I think that others would agree with me that she came back to Jerusalem with John. She fell asleep on the top of Mount Zion, which was inside the city gates at the time, but it's outside the city gates now. But Mount Zion was like the most glorious, even became a synecdoche, which is a figure of speech, meaning it became a part of the whole. In other words, when you speak of Jerusalem, you can say Mount Zion. God loves Mount Zion, which becomes synonymous with the whole city of Jerusalem, although it's just one of the hills. So Mary came back. She fell asleep. We don't know whether that means she died or a Dormition, but John Paul II said, of course, Mary died. and the doctors of the church pretty much do too. She was buried in the Kidron Valley. There is a church there next to Gethsemane called the Church of the Tomb of Mary. It's also called the Church of the Assumption. And you go down in there, and there's a tomb there and it used to be Roman Catholic. Now it's Greek Orthodox, but history is always, they claim that was where Mary was buried, and the disciples came back like with Jesus to anoint him more with oil and things at the end, and she was gone, and she was assumed into heaven from there. So that's the basic storyline of the end of Mary's life. And you would ask earlier about the Protestants too. Protestants don't have churches here like the Catholics. This is a very Catholic site. So they don't always feel welcome because they cannot go into the Church of the Annunciation or the Holy Sepulchre or the Church of Gethsemane and do their services. You have to be Catholic to do that. You have to have a Catholic priest and we always have a great Catholic priest with us who has his papers and he's legitimate. Otherwise, if you're not a Catholic or Orthodox in the Orthodox churches, then you have to celebrate outside. And so many times you see Protestants sitting out under a tree with a preacher preaching and they're singing some hymns. And that's pretty much the summation of their services here. Of
their existence as well, which is, we call them to come to the fullness of the faith, which it is.
There are some here. There are some Protestant churches here, but it's the anomaly.
Yep, without a doubt. Yeah. Steve, before we wrap up, I do want to ask you, because this has been so incredible and so edifying. I do want to ask you, I've heard of a lot of holy trips, a lot of pilgrimages. Anytime you go to church, you hear about it every year. There are a few that are offered. People will say, hey, I'm going to go on this pilgrimage. And the one thing that I always tell them is, hey, look into the stuff offered by my dear brother, Steve Ray. Steve, what sets your pilgrimages apart from any other kind of pilgrimage?
Well, there's not all pilgrimages are created equal, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of companies that sell cheap, and they go around to parishes and they get the pastor to go. They send them over on an airplane, but the group gets off the plane, and a guide and a driver meet them, and that guide is the king. Priest is not really even allowed by law to speak at the holy sites. He can celebrate mass and do priestly things, but the guide is in complete control. He may be Jewish, he may be Christian, he may be a Muslim. The first 2 times I came with our parish, I didn't know any better. We had a Muslim guide and a Muslim driver. And that's not the way you should see a Catholic pilgrimage. Also, there's a lot of times a low price is offered up front, and then you end up paying a lot when you get here. My prices are more. If you compare my prices online, it's going to be a lot more, but there's a reason for that, and you get what you pay for. So people can, I have a website called 21, the numeral 21 questions to ask. Numeral 21 questions to ask. And there's 21 reasons why I think we stand apart. We also support the local Christians here. I don't use Muslim restaurants and shops and hotels and guides. I use Christians. So we support the Christians, and we take up a collection for a Christian family here. My guide, we've worked 80 pilgrimages together for 20 years. He's a walking encyclopedia. He's an Arab, Palestinian, Roman Catholic, Israeli citizen. That just shows you how confusing things can be here. But he's a walking encyclopedia, and he knows the land. He's been doing this for 30 years. I do have to say, we have really nice hotels, like one I'm staying at now. We take people out for nice dinners, so you don't have to eat the buffet food every night. We go out to nice restaurants. We have a brand new bus. Always, my driver is named David. He has always a brand new bus. Every 2 years, he sells it to the other companies and gets another new one. But it makes a difference when you're traveling. You want good air conditioning when it's 100 degrees outside.
Yeah.
And you want to have, my wife and I are there. We take very good care of everyone. I give talks at all the sites like we're doing now. That makes ours different, I think. Instead of just having a local guide, maybe may or may not have good English, explaining to you. If you get a Jewish guide, it becomes very political. They want to say why Israel's good and Palestine is bad. If you have a Palestinian guide, oftentimes it's also political, the other way around. Palestinians are good, Israelis are bad. My guide is an Israeli Roman Catholic, Arab Palestinian. And when we met him, I interviewed all the Catholic guides 18 years ago, and I chose the one I wanted to work with for the next 25 years. And I chose him, and he said, I'll work with you. I'll make you my priority. And since then, we've been doing trips together, my wife and I and him. And I said, I don't want my trips to be political. They're not going to be about Israel or about the Palestinians. They're going to be spiritual pilgrimages, although there are places, like on the second day of our trip, the second full day, we're going to drive right past the Syrian and Lebanese border. We're going to stop and look 1 mile into Syria. And there are times when we were there, we could hear ISIS and the Nursa front bombs going off in Kenetra, which is a Christian village just across the border. We could see the smoke, and the ground was shaking under us, so we could hear that. And we talked about politics there, about the poor Christians in this land who are the victims, and they're the scapegoats, only 1.5%. So there are times where we do talk about it, but our pilgrimages are spiritual pilgrimages. And I can say that we haven't had a complaint in probably 5 years, because we work really hard to make it go really smoothly for people.
And I would add another thing that they are getting, because Steve, is as humble as you are, they are getting, in my estimations, one of the top notch Catholic apologists out there. Steve, as the audience may know, frequently has been published by the top Catholic publishers there are, frequently appears on EWTN, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, and any of the top Catholic YouTube sites. You are a dynamic apologist as well. So they're getting a very unique trip in the sense that you also have written some of the best books on Catholic theology. And Steve, I have greatly appreciated your time, brother. This has been one of the most unique and one of the most special shows we have ever done. And I look forward to having you back on again, my friend.
Good. You can't see my face well, but I'm blushing, all that stuff you just said. But I do have to say that I've done those things. But the thing, and we filmed a 9-part series over here over the last 20 years, all the way. We filmed it live all the way from Iraq and Turkey and Jordan and Syria to tell the whole story of the Bible. But the thing I'm proudest of, William, is that I've been married to the same beautiful woman for 45 years, and she's here with me always. And we love each other more now than when we got married. We have 4 kids, and we have 19 grandkids who all love the Lord. 2 boys are now in university, one in Wyoming Catholic College and one at Ave Maria in Florida. And my mother died on Mother's Day just a week ago today. She was 100 years old. Her last words were, "I can't wait to see Jesus, and I'm so proud of you, Steve." And she said, "I'm ready to go. Why is God taking so long to take me?" She fell asleep without pain and passed away in her sleep and went up to heaven to meet the Lord and my father, to whom she was married for 74 years. She couldn't wait to be reunited with him. So we had a wonderful funeral for her. It was sorrowful and joyful at the same time, because we know the resurrection and we know where she is.
She is in glory with the Lord, brother.
Yep.
I can guarantee you that. And Steve, thank you so much for your time, my friend. As you know very well, I will be keeping in touch, and I will definitely have you on again, brother. Thank you so much for your time.
God bless you. It's been wonderful to be here. Blessings from Jerusalem.
God bless you, Steve. Everybody, thank you very much. God bless everybody.